There was once a city so extraordinary that travelers who arrived at its gates could barely find the words to describe what they saw. A city of 1 million people, when most of the world's cities held only thousands. A city with hundreds of bookshops, when most of Europe had never seen a printed page. A city where mathematicians, astronomers, physicians and poets gathered from every corner of the known world, drawn by the belief that knowledge was the most valuable thing a civilization could possess. It stood at the center of the world's trade routes, its markets overflowing with silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa, glass from Persia. Its scholars translated the wisdom of ancient Greece and carried it forward, preserved it, built upon it, at a time when much of that knowledge had been forgotten everywhere else. For 500 years, it was the most brilliant city on earth. Its name was Baghdad. And tonight, we go there. Welcome to Dreamy Night Facts, a quiet space for calm storytelling, gentle learning, and unhurried journeys through the past. If you enjoy drifting through history in a relaxed and peaceful way, you can like the video and subscribe for more slow, immersive stories just like this one. There is no need to focus on every detail tonight. You can simply listen and let the story find you at whatever pace feels right. And if sleep arrives before the journey ends, that is perfectly all right. The city will still be there whenever you return. Before we begin, take a moment to settle. Wherever you are right now, allow your body to soften into the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest without tension. Let your jaw unclench, gently, without effort. Take a slow breath in and an even slower breath out. There is nowhere you need to be tonight. Nothing waiting for your attention. Only this moment, quiet and unhurried. Now, imagine a river, wide and that dark, moving slowly through a vast and open plain. The air above it is warm, carrying the faint scent of something distant, spice perhaps, or wood smoke, or the particular sweetness of a city that is very much alive. On the far bank, lights are beginning to appear. Not many at first, then more. And then, as your eyes adjust to the dark, you begin to see the shape of something extraordinary. Towers, domes, great walls curving in a perfect circle against the night sky. A city unlike anything you have seen before. The river moves steadily beneath you, The lights of the city flicker on the surface of the water. And somewhere within those walls, a story is waiting. Take one more slow breath in, and as you breathe out, we begin. A city born from a dream. In the year 762 AD, a caliph stood on the western bank of the Tigris River and looked out across a flat and open plain. His name was Al-Mansur. He was the second caliph of the Abbasid dynasty, a ruler of vast ambition and extraordinary patience. And he was looking for somewhere to build a city. Not just any city. The city, the capital of an empire that stretched from the edges of Central Asia to the shores of North Africa, a center of power and learning and commerce that would announce to the world that a new era had arrived. He had considered other sites. He had sent advisors ahead of him to test the land, the water, the climate. And here, on this wide plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in a place that had been inhabited in small ways for centuries, he made his decision. This is where Baghdad would stand. What followed was one of the most remarkable acts of urban planning in the ancient world. Al-Mansur did not inherit a city and expand it. He did not take a village and build outward from its existing shape. He began with a blank plain and a vision. 100,000 workers were brought together. Architects and engineers were consulted from across the empire. The finest builders in the world were summoned to this flat stretch of land beside the river. And what they built was a circle. A perfect circle. Not by accident, not by convention, but by deliberate, careful design. The round city of Baghdad was unlike anything that had been constructed before it. Two great circular walls, one inside the other, with a wide road running between them. 4 gates set at precise intervals, each one facing a different direction, each one opening onto a road that led to a different part of the empire. To the north, toward the Khorasan and Central Asia. To the south, toward Basra and the Persian Gulf. To the west, toward Syria and the Mediterranean. To the east, across the river and onward toward Persia. Baghdad was not built beside the world's trade routes. It was built at their center. Every road led here. Every river ran past it. Every merchant who moved goods between east and west passed within its reach. Al-Mansur had chosen well. At the very heart of the circular city, at the point where all roads met, stood the Caliph's palace. Its great green dome rose above everything else. It could be seen from miles away across the flat plain. From its roof, On a clear day, you could see the curvature of the world itself. Beside the palace, the great mosque, and around them both, the city spreading outward in rings, like the surface of water after a stone has been dropped. They say it took 4 years to build. 4 years from empty plain to living city. And when it was done, Al-Mansur walked through its gates for the first time as its ruler and declared that this was the most beautiful city on the face of the earth. He was not wrong. The round city. Let us walk through it together, slowly, without hurry, as the first inhabitants might have walked, still amazed at what had risen around them. We enter through one of the great gates. Each gate is a structure in itself, not simply a gap in a wall, but a vaulted passageway of brick and shadow, cool and quiet after the heat of the road. Above the gate, a guard room. Above that, a dome chamber open to the air, where a watchman can see in every direction. You pass through the outer wall and find yourself on a wide road lined with shops and small dwellings. Government officials lived here, members of the palace guard, people whose work required them to be always close. You walk further, through a second great wall, and the city opens before you. The inner city is quieter than you expected. There are no markets here, no traders calling out from doorways, no animals being led through narrow streets. Al-Mansur had forbidden commerce within the inner walls. This space was reserved for administration, for learning, for the business of running an empire. Wide avenues lead toward the center. The buildings along them are large and well proportioned. The brickwork is precise. Everything has been placed with intention. And at the center, the palace. Up close, it is even more imposing than it appeared from a distance. Its walls rise sheer and smooth. Its gate is flanked by carved columns. Inside, courtyards open one into the next, each one cooled by the movement of air through carefully placed archways. Water runs through channels cut into the floors. Gardens occupy the spaces between buildings. Palm trees stand in long rows, their shadows moving slowly across the pale stone as the sun shifts overhead. It is cool here, quiet. The sounds of the city beyond the walls are distant, softened, almost like the memory of noise rather than noise itself. You sit for a moment in one of the gardens. A fountain moves nearby. The water catches the light and scatters it across the surrounding walls in shifting patterns. This is the heart of the world, or so it feels. And in a very real sense, for the next 500 years, it is. The Abbasid Golden Age begins. Baghdad did not become the greatest city in the world by accident. It became great because of a set of beliefs that ran through the Abbasid Caliphate like a thread through fine cloth. The belief that knowledge was sacred, that learning from other cultures was not a weakness, but a strength, that a civilization which gathered wisdom, translated it, built upon it, and shared it freely would be stronger for it. This was not a universally held view in the medieval world. In many places and many times, knowledge was hoarded, jealously guarded, allowed to wither behind the walls of monasteries or the closed doors of private libraries. In Baghdad, it was different. The early Abbasid caliphs made a deliberate decision. They would seek out the knowledge of every culture their empire touched and bring it home. Greek philosophy, Persian mathematics, Indian astronomy, Chinese papermaking, Egyptian medicine. All of it welcomed, all of it studied, all of it translated into Arabic so that it could be shared across the empire and built upon by the scholars who gathered to receive it. This was the foundation of what we now call the Islamic Golden Age. And it began here, in this circular city on the banks of the Tigris, in the second half of the 8th century AD, with a caliph who believed that the mind was the most powerful thing a person could cultivate. Trade made Baghdad wealthy. Its position at the crossroads of the world's routes meant that goods and money flowed through it constantly. Its markets were legendary. Its merchants were among the most traveled people on earth. But it was not trade alone that made Baghdad great. It was the decision to spend that wealth on thought. To build not just palaces, but libraries. Not just markets, but schools. Not just armies, but institutions of learning that drew the finest minds of the age from every corner of the known world. For a time that lasted more than 4 centuries, this city was the center of human intellectual life. And at the very heart of that life stood one building above all others. Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of legend. Before we reach that building, we should pause for a moment with the man who did more than anyone to bring it into being. Harun al-Rashid. He ruled Baghdad from 786 to 809 AD. He was the 5th Abbasid Caliph, and he became in the imagination of the world, something much larger than a ruler. He became a legend. In his own lifetime, stories were told about him. After his death, those stories multiply. He appears in the tales of 1001 Nights as a figure who wanders the streets of Baghdad in disguise at night, listening to the real conversations of his people, dispensing justice and wisdom in unexpected places. Whether he actually did this is impossible to know. But the fact that people believed he did tells us something important. It tells us what they wanted from a ruler. Not distance, not grandeur for its own sake, but presence, curiosity, a willingness to be among them. The historical Harun al-Rashid was a complex man. He presided over a court of extraordinary brilliance. Poets, musicians, scholars, and philosophers gathered around him. He loved literature and supported it generously. The great works of translation that would define his era were undertaken with his encouragement and his funding. He was also a man of his time, in ways that were not always gentle. He ruled an empire through force as well as wisdom. His later years were marked by conflict and political difficulty. But at his peak, his court was the most culturally vibrant place on earth. He corresponded with Charlemagne, the great king of the Franks, who ruled in distant Europe. The two men exchanged gifts across the vast distance between their worlds. Charlemagne sent hunting dogs and fine cloth. Harun sent back an elephant, exotic spices, and a water clock so intricate and beautiful that Charlemagne's courtiers reportedly stood before it in astonished silence. Two rulers, two worlds. A thread of curiosity stretched between them across thousands of miles. That thread is Baghdad at its best. A city that reached outward, that was interested in the world beyond its walls, that understood that connection, exchange, and the willingness to be surprised were not luxuries. They were the very source of its greatness. The house of wisdom. And now we arrive. The Bayt al-Hikmah, the house of wisdom. It began modestly enough as a translation bureau under the early Abbasid caliphs. A room, perhaps several rooms, where scholars worked to render texts from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Syriac into Arabic. Under Harun al-Rashid, it grew. Under his son Al-Mamun, it became something the world had never seen before. Al-Mamun was, if anything, even more devoted to learning than his father. He reportedly dreamed of Aristotle and woke determined to gather every piece of Greek philosophical writing that could be found and bring it to Baghdad. He sent emissaries to Constantinople, to Alexandria, to the monasteries of Syria and Egypt, with instructions to find manuscripts and bring them back. They did. The texts arrived in Baghdad in great quantities. Crates of manuscripts, scrolls, books in languages that only a handful of people in the city could read. And so the translation movement began in earnest. Scholars were brought to Baghdad from across the empire. Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Muslims, men of every faith and background, united by a single qualification. They were brilliant, and they were willing to work. They worked in the house of wisdom side by side, translating texts by day, debating their meaning by night, copying what they had translated so that multiple versions could circulate through the empire. Imagine the building itself. Long rooms lined with shelves, clay lamps burning through the night, the sound of reed pens moving across paper. Paper itself, a relatively new technology in the Arab world, learned from Chinese craftsmen and now produced in Baghdad in quantities that made the city's literary culture possible. Scholars bent over texts in half a dozen languages, some translating alone, others working in pairs, one reading aloud in Greek or Persian, the other rendering the meaning into Arabic as swiftly as the words could be spoken. Arguments breaking out over the precise meaning of a single word. How do you translate a Greek philosophical concept for which Arabic has no equivalent? What do you do when the original author assumed a knowledge that your reader does not have? These were not simple problems. They required not just linguistic skill, but genuine understanding. You could not translate what you did not comprehend. And so the translators were also scholars, also thinkers, also contributors to the ideas they were carrying forward. They did not simply move words from one language to another. They brought the knowledge alive in a new world. Among the most celebrated of these translator scholars was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian from southern Iraq, whose mastery of Greek, Syriac, and Arabic made him invaluable. He translated more works than perhaps anyone else in the history of the movement. He was meticulous to a degree that bordered on obsessive. Before translating any text, he would gather every manuscript version of it he could find. He would compare them word by word, identifying errors and variations, working out which reading was most likely to reflect the original author's intention. This is scholarly method. This is criticism. This is the approach to ancient texts that would not appear formally in European scholarship for another 5 centuries. And he did it as a matter of routine, because he believed the text deserved it, because he believed the reader deserved it. He translated works of Hippocrates and Galen on medicine, works of Euclid on geometry, works of Ptolemy on astronomy, works of Aristotle on almost everything. His son Ishaq continued the work after him. His students spread outward across the Islamic world, carrying the methods he had taught them. The works of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, Ptolemy, Hippocrates, and Galen were all translated here, preserved here. When much of this knowledge had been lost or forgotten, in the places where it originated, it survived in Baghdad. The House of Wisdom was not only a library, it was an observatory, a laboratory, a meeting place for minds that would otherwise never have found each other. It had a reading room where scholars could sit with any text from the collection, a writing room where copying took place, because before printing, every book that existed in multiple places existed because someone had sat down and copied it by hand, word by word, page by page. A discussion room where ideas were debated openly across the boundaries of faith and tradition, with a freedom that was remarkable for its time. Al-Mamun himself would sometimes enter unannounced and join the debates. A caliph sitting among scholars, arguing about the nature of the soul or the movement of the planets, not as a patron dispensing judgment, but as a participant genuinely engaged with the question. This set a tone. It said, "This matters," not as decoration, not as symbol, but as the most serious activity a civilized person can undertake. It was, perhaps, the most important building that has ever stood on the face of the earth. And for several centuries, it was open. Its doors were not closed to the curious. Its shelves held the accumulated thought of the ancient world and the new ideas being built upon that foundation, all in one place, all within reach. The men who changed mathematics. Among the many scholars who worked within the House of Wisdom, one name stands above the rest in the story of how the modern world came to be. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He was a and he was working in Baghdad in the early 9th century AD during the reign of Al-Ma'mun, in the full flower of the Golden Age. He wrote a book. It was called, in Arabic, Al-Kitab Al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab Al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. From the word al-Jabr in that title, we get the word algebra. Al-Khwarizmi did not invent mathematics. He would be the first to say so. He drew on Indian and Greek mathematical thinking, on the work of scholars who had come before him from many traditions. But what he did was organize it. He created a systematic way of solving problems using unknown quantities. A method so clear and so powerful that it spread from Baghdad across the entire Islamic world, and from there into medieval Europe, and from there into every classroom and every calculation in the modern world. Every equation solved by every student in every school on earth today traces its lineage back to this man, working by lamplight in Baghdad more than 1200 years ago. And there is more. His name, Latinized by European scholars who translated his work, became the word algorithm. Al-Khwarizmi, algorithmi, algorithm. Every time a computer executes a set of instructions, every time a search engine ranks its results, every time a piece of software makes a decision based on a defined process, that is his name. Still present, still working, embedded in the infrastructure of the modern world, so deeply that most people who use the word have no idea where it came from. He also championed the use of Hindu Arabic numerals, the system of 0 through 9 that we use today. Before this system reached the West through his work, European mathematics used Roman numerals. Try multiplying 1447 by 312 using Roman numerals. You will quickly understand why the adoption of the new system changed everything. 0 in particular was a concept that transformed mathematics entirely. The idea that nothing could be represented as something, that the absence of a quantity was itself a quantity that could be named, placed, and worked with. It sounds obvious now. It was anything but. Working alongside Al-Khwarizmi were scholars whose contributions were equally remarkable. Al-Kindi worked on optics and cryptography. He developed the first known technique for breaking coded messages, what we now call frequency analysis. It is still used today. The Banu Musa brothers, three sons of a Baghdad astronomer, wrote a book of mechanical devices that described machines of breathtaking ingenuity. Self-trimming lamps, automatic flutes, devices for measuring the flow of water, a mechanical hand that could grasp objects. These were not toys. They were the product of minds that understood engineering at a level that would not be matched in Europe for several centuries. All of them working in the same building. All of them thinking in conversation with each other. All of them building on what the others had done. This is what the House of Wisdom made possible. Not just individual genius, but the amplification of genius through proximity. A day in Baghdad. Let us leave the House of Wisdom for a while and step out into the city. It is morning, early. The air still carries the coolness of the night. The call to prayer moves across the rooftops, rising from one minaret, then another, until the whole city is held within the sound of it. Doors begin to open. The first people into the streets are the bakers. Their ovens have been burning since before dawn. The smell of fresh flatbread is already moving through the narrow lanes, warm and yeasty and deeply familiar. People stop to buy as they pass. A coin exchanged. A round of bread still hot from the oven, wrapped in cloth and carried onward. The markets begin to come alive. Baghdad's markets were not gathered in a single place. They spread through the city in a great network. Different streets given over to different trades. The street of the booksellers. The street of the perfumers. The street of the coppersmiths. The street of the silk merchants. Each one a world of its own. In the copper district, the sound of hammers on metal fills the air. Pots and lamps and bowls take shape under skilled hands. The smell of hot metal and charcoal drifts through the morning. In the perfumer's district, it is the opposite. Cool and fragrant. Bottles of rose water and amber and oud arranged on shelves. Customers leaning close to small clay pots, breathing in, considering, deciding. In the food market, everything arrives by water. The Tigris is Baghdad's great artery. Every morning, before the city is fully awake, boats arrive, from upstream and downstream both. Fish still alive in wooden tanks of river water. Dates in great woven baskets. Watermelons. Pomegranates. Bags of rice and lentils and chickpeas. By mid-morning, the market is full. The languages you would hear walking through it would astonish you. Arabic in several dialects, Persian, Aramaic, Greek, the languages of traders from India and Central Asia, and the Swahili coast of East Africa. Baghdad was genuinely international, in a way that very few cities in human history have been. People from every background moved through its streets. They traded. They argued. They ate together. They prayed in different directions. And the city held all of it. Food in Baghdad was extraordinary by any measure. Lamb roasted over charcoal and served with rice and saffron. Flatbread spread with crushed sesame and honey. Stews of chickpeas and vegetables cooked slowly with spices, brought from a dozen different countries. Sweetmeats made from rosewater and pistachios and almond paste. And everywhere, the scent of spices. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka. Black pepper from India. Cardamom from the highlands of Ethiopia. Cloves from islands so distant that most of the people buying them could not have pointed to them on a map. Baghdad's cooks had access to an ingredient list that would take a modern chef's breath away. In the afternoon, the bathhouses fill. Every neighborhood had one. Some were simple. Others were elaborately tiled, with changing rooms and steam rooms and cool plunge pools. Attendants moved between patrons with oils and scrapers. Conversation flowed easily in the steam. The bathhouse was not simply a place to wash. It was a social institution, a place to meet, to debate, to hear news from the city and beyond. As the day softens toward evening, the bookseller's street comes into its own. Baghdad, in its golden age, had more bookshops than any city on earth. Hundreds of them. Stalls and shops piled with manuscripts, with poetry, with works of philosophy and medicine and astronomy. Literacy in Baghdad was not limited to the elite. It extended through the merchant class, through the artisan class, into the fabric of everyday life, in a way that was genuinely unusual for the medieval world. People stopped to browse, to argue about what they had read, to recommend books to strangers, to copy out passages that struck them as particularly beautiful or true. As the sun goes down, the call to prayer sounds again. The city slows. Lamps are lit in the windows of houses and shops, and the great public buildings along the river. Families gather. Meals are prepared and shared. And in the house of wisdom, the lamps burn on through the dark. Because for the scholars within those walls, the end of the day is simply the beginning of the quieter, more concentrated hours. The best hours. The hours when the city rests and thought is free to move without interruption. Ibn Sina, the Prince of Physicians. Among all the remarkable minds that emerged from this golden world, one stands apart for the sheer scope of what he achieved. Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. He was born in 980 AD in a small town in what is now Uzbekistan, far to the east of Baghdad. But his life and work were the direct product of the culture that Baghdad had created. He grew up in a world where knowledge was valued above almost everything else, where books circulated freely, where a curious mind could find teachers and texts and fellow thinkers wherever it looked. By the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran. By 16, he was practicing medicine. By 18, he had cured an illness that no other physician could diagnose in the local ruler, and received as his reward access to the ruler's private library. He spent 3 days in that library, barely sleeping, reading everything it contained. He went on to write 270 works on philosophy, on mathematics, on astronomy, on music, on geology, on psychology, on the nature of the soul, on the classification of minerals. But it is his canon of medicine for which he is most remembered. It is a work of a staggering ambition. 5 volumes, more than 1 million words, a systematic summary of all medical knowledge up to his time, combined with his own observations from decades of clinical practice. It covered the general principles of medicine, the simple drugs and their properties, diseases organized by the part of the body they affected, conditions that affected the whole body, compound drugs and their preparation. It was meticulous. It was organized. It was based on evidence and observation to a degree that was genuinely unusual for the time. It was used not just in the Islamic world, in Europe too. The canon of medicine was translated into Latin in the 12th century and became a standard medical textbook in European universities. It was still being taught at some European medical schools as late as the 17th century. For 700 years, doctors train using a book written by a man from Central Asia in the tradition of Baghdad that had passed through Arabic and Latin to reach them. Ibn Sina also wrote extensively on what we would now call the philosophy of mind. He proposed a famous thought experiment, the floating man, in which a person is imagined suspended in space with no sensory input whatsoever. Would that person still be aware of themselves? His answer was yes, and his reasoning anticipated debates that Western philosophers would not formally engage with for another 600 years. He died in 1037 AD. He was 57 years old. He had spent his entire life in motion, moving between courts and cities, writing through the night, never stopping. In his final years, he is said to have told his students that he had read Aristotle's Metaphysics 40 times without understanding it, and that it was only when he encountered Al-Farabi's commentary that its meaning became clear to him. 40 times. And he persisted. There is something in that image that feels very human and very familiar. The thing we cannot quite grasp, no matter how many times we return to it. And then one day, unexpectedly, a door opens, and it all makes sense. Al-Kindi, the philosopher of the Arabs. There is one more figure from the House of Wisdom who deserves to be held in the light for a moment. A man who came before Al-Khwarizmi and Ibn Sina, who helped create the intellectual atmosphere that made them possible. Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, known simply as Al-Kindi, and known in his own time and for centuries after by a title that tells you everything about how his world regarded him: the philosopher of the Arabs. He was born around 801 AD into an aristocratic Arab family in what is now Kuwait. He came to Baghdad as a young man and found there a world perfectly suited to the extraordinary breadth of his curiosity. Because Al-Kindi was curious about everything. He wrote works on philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, music theory, optics, geography, physics, meteorology, psychology, and cryptography. More than 250 works in total, most of them lost. What survives is enough to show us a mind of remarkable range and precision. He was the first person in the Islamic world to engage systematically with Greek philosophy and attempt to reconcile it with Islamic theology. This was not a simple task. Greek philosophy raised questions that did not always sit comfortably with religious orthodoxy. Al-Kindi navigated those tensions with care and intelligence. He argued that the pursuit of truth was a sacred act regardless of where truth was found. That a scholar who encountered a true idea in the works of another culture should receive it gratefully, not refuse it because of its origin. This was a philosophical foundation for the entire translation movement, a reasoned argument for openness, for intellectual humility, for the willingness to learn from anyone. His work on optics was extraordinary. He wrote about the nature of light and vision with a precision that would influence the great optician Ibn al-Haytham 2 centuries later, and through him, the entire European optical tradition. He understood that light travels in straight lines and that vision occurs when light enters the eye, not when rays project outward from it. This sounds like a small correction. It is not. It is a fundamental shift in how we understand perception itself. His work on cryptography introduced frequency analysis. The idea that in any language, certain letters appear more often than others, and that by counting those patterns, a coded message can be broken without knowing the key. This technique is still used. It remains foundational to modern cryptanalysis. He also wrote about music beautifully. He believed music could shape the human soul, that different rhythms and tones could shift emotion in predictable ways. He was thinking about the psychology of music more than 1,000 years before it became a formal field. He fell from favor in his later years. His library was confiscated. He was flogged. He recovered his library. He continued working. He died around 873 AD, probably in Baghdad, probably still writing. He had spent his life building a bridge between the ancient world and the new one. Most who crossed it never knew his name. The sky above Baghdad. Step outside for a moment, away from the lamps and the shelves and the sound of pens on paper, into the courtyard, into the open air. Look up. The sky above Baghdad on a clear night is extraordinary. The flat plain that surrounds the city means there is no horizon to interrupt it. It stretches from edge to edge, vast and very dark, filled with more stars than most people in the modern world have ever seen. The scholars of the House of Wisdom looked at this sky every night, and they did not simply admire it. They mapped it. The tradition of astronomical observation in the Islamic world grew directly from the translation movement. The works of Ptolemy, the great Greek astronomer, have been translated into Arabic. The astronomical observations of Indian scholars had arrived alongside them, and the scholars of Baghdad read all of it, checked it against their own observations, and began to improve upon it. They built instruments of remarkable precision. The astrolabe, a device for measuring the position of stars and planets and calculating time and location from those measurements, was refined and perfected in Baghdad to a degree that made it one of the most sophisticated scientific instruments in the medieval world. A skilled astrolabe user could determine the time of day or night to within minutes. They could calculate the direction of Mecca from any location on Earth. They could predict the rising and setting of the sun and moon months in advance. This was not magic. It was mathematics. Very careful, very patient mathematics applied to very careful, very patient observation. The astronomer Al-Biruni worked in this tradition. He observed the sky for decades from his observatory in northern Iraq. He calculated the length of the solar year to within 2 minutes of the modern figure. He measured the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, with an accuracy that would not be surpassed for centuries. His tables were used by Copernicus when he developed his model of the solar system in the 16th century. Copernicus cited him by name. Look up again at the sky above Baghdad. The stars you see there carry Arabic names. Names given to them by the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, who mapped the heavens with such thoroughness that their nomenclature became universal. Aldebaran, the follower, named for its position following the Pleiades across the sky. Betelgeuse, from the Arabic for the shoulder of the giant being Orion, whose constellation it marks. Vega, from the Arabic for the swooping eagle. Rigel, from the Arabic for the left leg of Orion. Deneb, from the Arabic for the tail of the hen. These names are used by every astronomer in the world today. in every language, in every country. When scientists discuss the stars in Orion or Cygnus or Taurus, they use words first written down by scholars sitting in Baghdad or its observatories more than 1,000 years ago. The sky was not separate from the life of the city. It was woven into it. The Islamic calendar is lunar, the months governed by the movement of the moon. Every act of prayer is oriented by the position of the sun and the direction of Mecca. The great festivals of the year are astronomical events. And so astronomy was not a purely theoretical pursuit. It had immediate practical meaning for daily life. The scholars who mapped the stars were not only satisfying their curiosity, they were serving their community, providing the measurements and calculations that organized the entire rhythm of life. Stand here in the courtyard for a moment longer. Let the stars settle above you. They are the same stars the scholars of Baghdad watched in the same sky, making the same slow arc from east to west through the hours of the night. They have been watched and named and mapped and wondered about for longer than any of the cities built beneath them. And they will continue long after every city now standing has returned to dust. Women of Baghdad. History has a way of recording the lives of the powerful and the famous and the publicly visible, and leaving others in the shadow. Women in Abbasid Baghdad lived within a world that placed significant constraints on their public lives. And yet, within and around those constraints, their presence shaped the culture of the city in ways that the historical record only partially captures. At the highest levels of Abbasid society, women exercised real influence. The mothers and wives and sisters of caliphs were not simply decorative figures. They owned property. They patronized poets and musicians and scholars. They commissioned buildings. They negotiated on behalf of their families in the complex political landscape of the court. Zubaydah, the wife of Harun al-Rashid, was one of the most powerful women of the medieval Islamic world. She was wealthy in her own right, the granddaughter of the Caliph Al-Mansur. And she used that wealth with purpose. When pilgrims traveling to Mecca suffered from lack of water along the desert routes, Zubaydah funded the construction of a vast water supply system. Wells sunk along the entire pilgrimage road from Baghdad to Mecca. Cisterns built to catch and store rainwater. Channels cut through rock. It took years. It cost an enormous sum. When her advisor suggested the expense was excessive, she reportedly told them that she would pursue the project even if each stroke of the pickaxe cost a gold dinar. The Darb Zubaydah's road, served pilgrims for centuries after her death. Its ruins can still be traced across the desert. She also built mosques and rest houses and funded charitable institutions throughout the empire. She was not simply a powerful woman. She was a builder of the world she lived in stone and water and the sustained effort of organized will. Within the intellectual life of Baghdad, women were present in ways that are easy to overlook. Female scholars and poets existed. Their names appear in the historical record, sometimes only briefly, like light moving across water. The tradition of the singing girl, the Kaina, was a significant one in Abbasid culture. These were not merely entertainers. The finest among them were accomplished musicians, poets, and conversationalists who moved through the highest levels of society. They were educated to a standard that most men could not match. They participated in the intellectual debates of the age. Their compositions were heard and admired and preserved. Some of the poetry in the tradition that eventually fed into 1001 Nights came from this world. From women who were professionally skilled in the art of narrative, in the telling of stories that held an audience in precisely calibrated suspense. Scheherazade herself, the great narrator of the nights, is a figure who could only have been imagined in a culture that understood what a woman with a formidable mind could actually do. She is not passive. She is not simply beautiful. She is the most intelligent person in her story. She uses her intelligence deliberately and strategically to save not only herself but others. She is a portrait of what storytelling can achieve when wielded with full awareness of its power. And she was imagined here, in this city, in this culture, by people who had seen in the world around them what it looked like when a woman brought her full capacity to bear. The history of women in Baghdad is not a simple story. There were constraints. There were spaces closed to them that were open to men. The record is partial, and the silences in it are real. But through those silences, the presence is still there. In the road built across the desert, in the poetry that circulated through the city, in the stories told night after night by a narrator who refused to be silenced. Gardens and light. Before we move further into the story, let us slow down once more and simply be inside the city for a while. Baghdad was not only a city of books and scholars and markets and trade routes. It was a city of extraordinary physical beauty. The early Abbasid caliphs understood that beauty was not separate from civilization. It was part of what civilization meant, and they built accordingly. The palace complex at the heart of the round city was surrounded by gardens unlike anything then existing in the Western world. Not the rough kitchen gardens of medieval Europe. Not simple orchards planted for practical use. Designed gardens. Gardens conceived as aesthetic experiences, as places to slow down, to breathe, to move through a world arranged with deliberate care. Trees were brought from distant provinces. Rare plants collected from across the empire. Channels of water ran between planted beds in geometric patterns. The sound of moving water a constant presence. Fountains stood at the intersections of paths. Not elaborate mechanical constructions, but simple stone bowls from which water rose and fell back in a continuous, quiet motion. The effect of water in a hot climate is difficult to overstate. In the long summers of the Mesopotamian plain, when the air outside the garden walls shimmered with heat and the dust rose in eddies from the unpaved roads, the gardens were another world entirely. Cool, green, smelling of roses and jasmine and the particular dark sweetness of wet earth in a dry land. People walked here in the early morning, before the day's work began, and again in the late afternoon as the heat softened. The gardens were not private. They were part of the city's shared life. Alongside the great gardens of the palace, private homes throughout Baghdad were built around internal courtyards. This was an architectural tradition that had deep roots in the region, and it served a purpose that was both practical and beautiful. The courtyard excluded the noise and dust of the street. It created a private sky, a rectangle of blue above the household, framed by the walls of the home. A fountain or a small pool at the center, perhaps a single tree for shade. The rooms of the house opened onto this courtyard rather than onto the street. Life was oriented inward, toward the water, toward the light falling from above. At night, the courtyard became something else again. The stars appeared within the frame of the walls. The temperature dropped quickly in the open air. Families gathered in the cool, Sound was different here too. The city outside, which could be loud and busy through the day, was muffled. What remained was the sound of the fountain. Perhaps music from within a room. The voices of the household. The architecture of Baghdad was designed to create these pockets of calm within the larger life of the city. Not escape from the world, but a different register of it. Quieter, more intimate, more attentive to the small pleasures that make a day feel like something worth having. The great public buildings were beautiful too. The mosques with their tiled interiors and their carefully proportioned spaces. The bathhouses with their domed ceilings pierced by small round windows through which light fell in shifting columns across the steam below. The covered markets with their high arched roofs and the particular quality of light that filtered through them, warm and indirect, softening everything it touched. Baghdad was not a rough place. It was not a city that grew without thought for how it felt to be inside it. It was built by a people who believed that beauty was worth the effort. And they were right. The stories of 1001 Nights. There is another kind of knowledge that Baghdad gave the world. Not the knowledge of equations or medical texts or philosophical systems, but the knowledge that lives in stories. The collection we know as 1001 Nights or Arabian Nights did not begin in Baghdad. Its roots are older and wider than any single city. Stories from Persia, from India, from ancient Egypt, from the folk traditions of a dozen different cultures. But it was in Baghdad, during the Golden Age, that these stories were gathered, shaped, written down, given the frame that holds them all together. The frame of Scheherazade, a young woman who finds herself married to a king consumed by bitterness. A king who has decided that all women are treacherous and who has made it his practice to marry a new wife each night and execute her by morning. Scheherazade knows this, and yet she chooses to go to him. Her plan is simple, and it is brilliant. She will tell him a story, and she will not finish it before dawn. And the king, desperate to know what happens next, will keep her alive one more day. And so it begins, night after night, story within story, a tale that opens into another tale, that opens into another. the king listening despite himself. Scheherazade navigating the darkness with nothing but her voice and her imagination and her absolute refusal to be silenced. 1001 Nights. Nearly 3 years of stories. And at the end of it, the king has changed. He has been moved, surprised, amused, made to feel something he had closed himself off from feeling. And he does not carry out his plan. The story saved her. Within the frame of Scheherazade's voice, the tales of Sinbad the Sailor unfold across 7 extraordinary voyages. Islands that turn out to be sleeping whales. Valleys of diamonds guarded by enormous serpents. Rocks, birds of impossible size circling above mountains at the edge of the world. Ali Baba finds a cave full of treasure and the words that open it. Aladdin discovers a lamp in an underground chamber and the genie who inhabits it. These stories have traveled so far from their origin that most people who know them have no idea where they came from. They came from here, from this world, from a culture that valued imagination and narrative and the power of a well-told story, just as it valued mathematics and medicine and the precise observation of the stars. Because the people of Baghdad understood something that is easy to forget, that stories are also knowledge, that the ability to imagine another life, another world, another way of being human is not a luxury or an entertainment. It is essential. It is how we understand each other. It is how we survive. The Tigris at night. Let us rest here for a while. On the western bank of the Tigris. The city is quiet now. The markets are closed. The booksellers have shuttered their stalls. The last of the bakers' fires have burned down to coals. The river moves past in the dark. It is wider than you might expect, and darker. Its surface catches the light of the moon and holds it for a moment before letting it go. Boats are moored along the bank. Small wooden vessels. Their ropes creak gently with the movement of the water. On the far bank, the lights of the eastern city are reflected in long, wavering lines on the surface of the river. It is very quiet. The air is warm and carries something on it. The faint scent of the river itself. Reeds and water, and the dark, cool smell of deep water moving over stone. A lamp burns in a window high up in the city wall. Someone is awake in there. Reading, perhaps. Or simply sitting with the night, the way people sometimes do. The river does not hurry. It has been here far longer than the city that lines its banks. It will be here long after. It carries with it the memory of everything that has passed this way. The boats of merchants, the barges of caliphs, the fishing vessels of people whose names were never written down. All of it moving through. All of it carried downstream toward the sea. You can let your thoughts do the same. Let them move without direction, without destination, like the river, just flowing. Somewhere behind you, in the house of wisdom, a lamp still burns. Someone is still working. The sound of a pen on paper, the quiet turning of a page. But that can wait. For now, there is only the river. Night. And the slow movement of water in the dark. Breathe in and breathe out. There is nowhere to be but here. Trade and the connected world. Baghdad's position at the center of the world's trade routes was not an accident of geography alone. It was also the product of deliberate policy. The Abbasid caliphs understood that trade was the blood of a living empire. That goods moving freely through a well-maintained network of routes meant wealth, but also connection. And connection meant ideas. And ideas meant power of a different kind. So they maintained the roads. They built caravanserais, great rest houses set at regular intervals along the major routes where merchants and their animals could shelter and sleep and eat and gather news before moving on. They stabilized the currency. The gold dinar and the silver dirham circulated across the Islamic world with a reliability that made long-distance trade practical in a way it had rarely been before. And merchants came. From China, silk arrived in great bolts of color. Blue and gold and deep crimson. So fine, you could read through it. Porcelain too, thin as paper, painted with designs that Baghdad's artisans would study and imitate and transform into something new. From India, cotton and pepper and indigo. Teak wood for building. Steel from the forges of the Deccan. mathematicians and astronomers who brought with them the numerical system that Al-Khwarizmi would carry into the foundations of modern mathematics. From East Africa, ivory and gold, and a trade in human beings, that is the dark thread running through all of this history. The wealth of the Islamic world was built in part on enslaved labor. It is part of the story, and it cannot be left out. From Central Asia, furs and horses and amber. From the Byzantine Empire to the west, fine cloth and glass, and the occasional diplomatic gift wrapped in the complicated language of two great powers maintaining an uneasy peace. The bazaars of Baghdad held all of this. You could walk through the city on a single afternoon and handle objects that had begun their journeys in places most Baghdadis would never visit. Run your hand across Chinese silk. Smell Indian pepper straight from the sack. Examine a piece of Byzantine glasswork so thin it seemed impossible it had not shattered on its journey. The world was smaller in Baghdad than anywhere else, because Baghdad had made it so. And along the same routes that goods traveled, ideas moved too. Paper making arrived from China and transformed Baghdad's intellectual life. Paper was cheaper than parchment, easier to produce, available in quantities that made mass copying of text possible for the first time. The books of the House of Wisdom existed in part because paper made them possible. A technology carried by merchants, absorbed by scholars, used to change the world. This is how civilizations grow. Not in isolation, not by refusing what arrives from elsewhere, but by reaching out, taking in, transforming, and giving back something new. Baghdad understood this instinctively. For 500 years, it lived it. Al-Biruni, the scholar who measured the earth. There is a name that should be far more famous than it is. Abu Rayhan Al-Biruni. He was born in 973 AD in what is now Uzbekistan. He lived through one of the most turbulent periods of the Islamic world. He was captured by kings, transported across continents, forced to move again and again as the political landscape shifted beneath him. And through all of it, he kept working. He wrote in Arabic and Persian. He taught himself Sanskrit so he could read Indian texts in their original language. He produced works on mathematics, astronomy, physics, geography, pharmacology, history, and philosophy. more than 140 books. But it is one specific achievement that takes the breath away. Standing on a hilltop in what is now Pakistan, using a method he had devised himself, measuring the angle of the horizon and applying a geometric calculation, Al-Biruni calculated the circumference of the Earth. His answer: approximately 40,000 kilometers. The actual circumference of the Earth at the equator is 40,075 kilometers. He was within 200 kilometers, on a hilltop, with the instruments available in the 11th century. He also proposed, quietly, carefully, without insisting on it, that the Earth might move around the Sun rather than the other way around. He did not push this view. The evidence available to him was not sufficient to be certain. But he named the possibility. He held it open. 500 years before Copernicus. He spent years in India studying its culture, with a curiosity and a respect that was unusual even by the standards of his own time. He learned to read Sanskrit. He interviewed scholars. He attended religious ceremonies. He wrote a book about India, the Kitab al-Hind, that is still considered one of the most remarkable works of comparative culture ever written. He tried to understand India on its own terms, not through the lens of what he already believed, but by setting his assumptions aside and asking, what is actually here? This is a very difficult thing to do. Most people in most times have been unable to do it. Al-Biruni did it. He also wrote about the formation of geological strata. He observed that certain rocks contained the fossils of sea creatures far from the sea, and proposed that these places had once been underwater. A conclusion that would not be formalized in European science for another 700 years. He died in 1048 AD. He was 75 years old. Near the end of his life, a scholar came to visit him. And as they were talking, Al-Biruni asked the visitor a question about Islamic inheritance law. The visitor was surprised. Why would a dying man want to discuss such a technical matter? Al-Biruni looked at him. Is it not better to die knowing this than to die not knowing it? He died shortly after, still learning, still asking, right to the end. The Hospitals of Baghdad. There is one more part of Baghdad's story that deserves its own quiet chapter. Not the libraries, not the markets, not the palaces or the gardens, the hospitals. Because Baghdad gave the world something that we now take entirely for granted and rarely think to trace back to its origin. The hospital as an institution, as a building dedicated specifically to the care of the sick, staffed by trained physicians, open to anyone regardless of their faith or their wealth. This did not exist before the Islamic world created it. In ancient Greece and Rome, the sick were cared for at home or in temples or in military field hospitals that served soldiers alone. There was no institution that functioned the way a modern hospital does. In Baghdad, in the 9th century, this changed. The first great hospital, the Bimaristan, was established under Harun al-Rashid. Later caliphs expanded and refined the model until Baghdad had several functioning hospitals, serving the city's enormous population. These were not simple shelters. They were sophisticated institutions with wards separated by the type of illness being treated. Wards for fevers, wards for eye complaints, wards for injuries, wards for mental illness. Because Baghdad's physicians understood, centuries before European medicine would formally acknowledge it, that disorders of the mind were medical conditions deserving of care rather than punishment. The hospitals kept records. Patients were admitted, their conditions noted, their treatment recorded, their outcomes observed. This was not merely administrative tidiness. It was the foundation of evidence-based medicine. The understanding that treatment should be informed by what has worked before. Physicians were trained and examined before they were permitted to practice. A formal licensing system. In the 10th century AD, the physician Sinan ibn Thabit introduced examinations for medical practitioners in Baghdad, the first formal medical licensing system in history. More than 860 physicians passed his examinations and were granted licenses to practice. 860 in a single city in the 10th century. The hospitals also had pharmacies. Trained pharmacists prepared medicines according to written formulae. The separation of pharmacy from medicine, the idea that the person who diagnoses and the person who prepares the remedy should be different people with different training, began here. Physicians also made rounds. They visited patients regularly, assessed their condition, adjusted their treatment. This sounds obvious. It was not. It was a system that had to be invented, organized, and maintained. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, that vast compendium of medical knowledge, described in detail how hospitals should function, how wards should be organized, how patients should be categorized, how records should be kept, how physicians should reason from symptoms to diagnosis. It was a manual for an institution that Baghdad had already built. And when European physicians encountered this model, through the translations made in Spain and through direct contact during the Crusades, they brought it home with them. The great hospitals of medieval Europe, the teaching hospitals attached to the first European universities, the idea that medicine is a learned discipline practiced in institutions with standards and records and trained practitioners. All of it traces back to Baghdad, to the Bimaristan on the banks of the Tigris, to the physicians who walked its wards each morning, to the pharmacists who ground their medicines by lamplight, to the administrators who kept the records, to the caliphs who funded it all in the belief that caring for the sick was not charity but obligation. It is perhaps the most intimate of Baghdad's gifts to the world, because it is not about knowledge in the abstract. It is about a hand placed on a forehead to check for fever, a voice asking, "How do you feel today?" A record kept so that the next patient with the same symptoms might be treated more effectively. Care, organize, sustain, made into a system so that it outlasted any individual act of kindness. This too began here. The shadow of what is coming. Nothing lasts unchanged. This is not a pessimistic observation. It is simply the nature of things. The conditions that make one era possible are themselves always shifting. And what they shift toward is never the same as what came before. By the 10th century, the political unity of the Abbasid Caliphate had begun to fragment. The caliphs in Baghdad retained their symbolic authority, but real power in different parts of the empire had passed to regional dynasties, powerful families who governed in their own name, while nominally acknowledging the caliph. This was not an immediate catastrophe for learning. In fact, some of the greatest scholars of the Golden Age lived and worked during this period of fragmentation. Ibn Sina, Al-Biruni, the poet and mathematician Omar Khayyam, The culture of learning that Baghdad had created had spread widely enough that it no longer depended on the health of any single institution or any single center. It was in the world now, part of the fabric of Islamic civilization across a vast geography. But Baghdad itself was changing. The great building project slowed. The markets remained active, but the energy of the earlier centuries was different now. More settled, less electric. The Tigris still moved through the city. The minarets still rose above the rooftops. The booksellers still lined their street. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks moved into Mesopotamia and took effective control of the city. The Caliph remained, but as a figurehead. Power rested elsewhere. Still, the scholars worked. Still, the libraries held their contents. Still, the city functioned as one of the great urban centers of the medieval world. But the conditions that had made the Golden Age possible, the open curiosity of the early Abbasid caliphs, the enormous wealth flowing through the city, the specific culture of gathering and translating and building upon the knowledge of every tradition, those conditions were more fragile now. Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, a force was moving that would change everything. 1258. In the winter of 1258 AD, an army appeared on the eastern bank of the Tigris. It was led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the ruler of the Ilkhanate, a man who had already destroyed cities so thoroughly that some of them never recovered. The army was vast. Contemporary accounts describe numbers that seem almost impossible. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, siege engines, cavalry that stretched across the horizon. The Caliph at the time was Al-Mustasim. He had been warned. His advisors had told him what was coming. He had been urged to make terms, to negotiate, to find some path that might spare the city. He did not act quickly enough. The Mongols besieged Baghdad for 2 weeks. On the 10th of February 1258, the walls were breached. What happened next lasted for days. Buildings were burned. The palace was stripped. The great mosque was ransacked. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. The Caliph himself was captured. According to accounts, and the accounts vary, as accounts of catastrophe often do, he he was executed in the Mongol manner, wrapped in felt, trampled by horses, so that his blood would not touch the ground. The 500-year-old Abbasid Caliphate ended in a single week. But it is what happened to the books that has lodged most deeply in the imagination of those who know this history. The contents of the House of Wisdom and the other great libraries of Baghdad were thrown into the Tigris. Centuries of manuscripts, translations, original works, medical texts, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, poetry, philosophy, the accumulated thought of 500 years of the most intense intellectual activity the medieval world had known. Thrown into the river. The water, they say, ran black with ink for days. Whether this is literally true or a later elaboration of something more complex, the essential fact is real enough. An enormous quantity of knowledge was lost in 1258. How much? We cannot know. Because we cannot know what we no longer have. This is one of the great silences of history. The books that might have existed, the ideas that might have continued, the questions that might have been answered centuries earlier. All of it gone into the water, into the dark. What survived? And yet, not everything was lost. In the years and decades before 1258, much had already moved. The translation movement had been so thorough, the culture of copying so deeply embedded, that versions of the most important texts existed in many places simultaneously. In Cairo, in Cordoba, in the libraries of Persia and Central Asia. When Baghdad fell, these copies remain. Scholars had also fled. In the weeks and months before the siege, as the news of the Mongol advance spread, some of the city's intellectuals had left, taking what they could carry, moving to places they hoped would be safer. They carried knowledge in their heads as well as in their bags. The training they had received, the methods they had learned, the arguments they had had and the conclusions they had reached. This too survived. And the people themselves. And there was something else. By 1258, the knowledge that Baghdad had preserved and expanded had already been flowing into Europe for more than a century. in the great cities of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, in Toledo and Cordoba and Seville, the same work of translation was underway, but in reverse. Now it was Arabic text being translated into Latin, into the language of European scholars. Euclid's Elements, Al-Khwarizmi's Algebra, Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, Al-Kindi's works on optics, the astronomical tables of Al-Battani, all of it crossing into Europe, entering in the universities of Bologna and Paris and Oxford, changing what European scholars knew, changing what they thought was possible. The ideas that would fuel the European Renaissance, that would lead to the scientific revolution, that would reshape the modern world. Many of them were watered by the Golden Age of Baghdad, carried west by translators working in Spanish cities, by merchants who brought books alongside spices, by scholars who had studied in the Islamic world and returned home with new questions. The fall of Baghdad was a catastrophe, but the knowledge of Baghdad had already escaped. And in that, something persists. Not the city as it was, not the house of wisdom as it stood, not the particular brilliant world that Al-Khwarizmi and Ibn Sina and Al-Biruni and Scheherazade inhabited, but the questions they asked, the methods they used, the deep and enduring belief that the world can be understood, that knowledge is worth pursuing across every boundary of language and faith and culture, that the mind is the most extraordinary instrument any civilization possesses. These did not go into the river. They are still here. Closing meditation. And now, as the long story of Baghdad begins to settle into stillness, we return to the river. The Tigris moves on, as it always has, as it always will. It does not remember 762 and the founding of the Round City. It does not grieve 1258 and what was lost in its waters. It simply moves steadily southward toward the sea, and along its banks, even now, people live. The city called Baghdad still stands on the same ground where Al-Mansur placed his first stone. The same flat plain, the same warm air, the same vast sky above. It has been through things we cannot fully imagine. And it continues. This is what cities do. What people do. They continue. They carry what they can. They rebuild what they can. They hold on to what matters and let go of what they must. And they go on. Let your breathing slow now. Naturally, without effort. A soft breath in and a long, quiet breath out. Allow your body to settle a little deeper into wherever you are resting. Feel the weight of your shoulders releasing, your hands growing still, your thoughts beginning to drift without direction. Think for a moment, if you would like to, of all the minds we have moved alongside tonight. Al-Mansur standing on the bank of the Tigris with a city in his imagination. A blank plain before him, and in his mind, circles within circles. Walls, gates, roads reaching outward in 4 directions toward the 4 corners of the world. The translators working through the night in the House of Wisdom, carrying the words of ancient Greece into a new language, making them available to a new world. Hunayn ibn Ishaq gathering every manuscript he could find, checking each one word by word, refusing to offer anything less than his best understanding of what the original author had actually meant. Al-Khwarizmi at his desk, solving equations that still bear his name, in every algorithm running on every device in the modern world. Working without knowing, without being able to know, that 12 centuries later, his methods would be running inside machines that would have seemed to him like magic. Al-Kindi arguing that truth is truth regardless of who speaks it. That a scholar who finds wisdom in a Greek text should receive it gratefully. That openness is not weakness. That curiosity is a form of courage. Ibn Sina reading Aristotle 40 times. And then finding in a single sentence of commentary by another scholar the key that made everything clear. Al-Biruni on his hilltop in Pakistan, measuring the angle of the horizon, doing the calculation in his head, arriving at a number that is almost exactly right, going back to his desk to write it down, wondering perhaps what it meant that the earth was so large and human life so brief within it. Zubaydah in the desert, watching workers sink wells along the pilgrimage road, knowing the people she would never meet, in years she would not live to see, would drink from these wells and continue their journey. Scheherazade, speaking into the darkness, story by story, night by night, keeping herself alive with nothing but her voice, understanding with perfect clarity that a story well told is one of the most powerful things in the world. All of them here, all of them gone, and all of them in ways that are sometimes difficult to see, but always present, still with us, in the hours we keep. 60 minutes, 60 seconds, in the mathematics that underpins every calculation made anywhere on Earth, in the medical understanding that has saved uncountable lives, in the stories that have been told and retold across centuries until their origin has been forgotten, but their power has not. They are here. You are here. Part of the same long story, moving through it at your own particular moment, as they move through theirs. There is nothing you need to hold on to from tonight. Whatever stayed with you, stayed. Whatever drifted past, that is perfectly all right. The story has already done its quiet work. Now there is only this: the darkness, the stillness, your own slow and steady breathing. In, out. Let everything else go. The river is still moving somewhere in the dark. The stars above the plain of Iraq are the same stars that the scholars of the House of Wisdom mapped with such careful attention 1,000 years ago. Nothing needs to be understood tonight. Nothing needs to be held. Only rest. Only the soft arrival of sleep whenever it is ready. You can let it come now. Gently. Without resistance. Sleep well.